People who didn't live through it don't really know how big James Bond mania was in the 1960s. It was as big as the MCU is now. Sean Connery became an instant star. The franchise went skyrocketing. When Dr. No from Russia with Love and Goldfinger came out, people went crazy. And that then transferred to television, because television always emulates the success of movies. So let's talk about one of those series from the 1960s that emulated the success of the James Bond films in its own kind of quirky, kind of eccentric way. Let's talk about The Man from U.n.c.l.e. So before we get started, I do have to do a thank you to you guys, the people who watch the videos, because 503 subscribers. I've cracked 500. So if you are interested in this and you are enjoying the channel and the content, let your friends know so they can subscribe too, because I've got a goal here. I want to get to 1,000 by the end of the year. If I don't, fair enough, but if I do, all the better. So thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for all the comments people have left and all the love it's been getting. It means a lot to me. But now let's talk about The Man from U.n.c.l.e. The Man from U.n.c.l.e. is kind of unique in TV spy series because it's got direct links in weird ways to both James Bond franchise and Sherlock Holmes, and I'll explain that a little bit later. The series ran from 1964 to 1968 with 105 episodes over 4 seasons. It started out a bit differently than it finished, and it was influenced by other shows that were on at the same time as it. I probably should go through the premise first. The premise of the series is that there is an organization called the United Network Command for Law Enforcement, u.n.c.l.e., which fights bad guys, people who want to take over the world, you know, people like News Limited except supervillains. The main antagonistic organization to u.n.c.l.e. is Thrush, and that stands for, and I'm going to read this off a page, so I'll put up a little thing in front of it: Technological Hierarchy for the Removal of Undesirables and the Subjugation of Humanity. Again, it sounds a lot like Fox News. So it kind of parallels the James Bond franchise in the fact that you've got MI6 as the protagonist and you've got Spectre as the antagonist. So Thrush is the Spectre of The Man from U.n.c.l.e. The series stars a couple of actors who had already been around for a fair bit. Robert Vaughn, who was one of the Magnificent Seven, and now as my party trick I'm going to tell you all of the actors who were in the Magnificent Seven without making any notes. Let's see. Number 1, Steve McQueen, Yul Brynner, James Coburn, Charles Bronson, Brad Dexter, Robert Vaughn, Horst Buchholz. Ta-da! In fact, Robert Vaughn had been around since the late 1950s in Hollywood. He was in a movie called Teenage Caveman that Roger Corman did back in the day. David McCallum started out in England and then came over to America. Everybody remembers him from 1963 in The Outer Limits in the episode The Sixth Finger. Classic episode, so they both had a bit of chops in Hollywood. Their boss was played by an actor called Leo G. Carroll. Leo G. Carroll had been around for a long time as well. He plays Mr. Waverly, the head of u.n.c.l.e. He'd been in Hitchcock films. He was in The Bad and the Beautiful back in 1952. You can see him in a lot of things. So the basic premise is pretty simple. u.n.c.l.e. versus Thrush. Thrush wants to destroy or conquer the world depending on the particular episode we're talking about. u.n.c.l.e. wants to save the world. The first season of The Man from U.n.c.l.e. was in black and white back in 1964. And the first episode starts really strangely because Thrush invades u.n.c.l.e. They go into their headquarters and are basically trapped and picked off by the u.n.c.l.e. agents, and finally they get to confront Napoleon Solo, who shoots the last guy. Ilya Kuryakin, the character played by David McCallum, who was a Russian, because détente was a big thing in the 60s. They were kind of drifting away from the Cold War a little bit. Didn't really come in as a full partner to Napoleon Solo until much later in the first series. I think they may well have been influenced by some other spy shows that were on at the time, particularly and now problematically Sheldon Leonard's TV series I Spy, starring Robert Culp and Bill Cosby. I may talk about that in a future episode. Let me know if you do want me to do that. It's going to be difficult with the Cosby aspect to it, but I think it's quite a memorable, and in spite of that, quite a good spy show as well. So The Man from U.n.c.l.e. started out kind of semi-seriously, semi-not seriously. Sam Rolfe and Norman Felton, the two guys who created the show, had a bit of a weird premise for it, in that each episode they wanted to have a member of the public get involved in the spy shenanigans. So in the first episode, it's a housewife living in the Midwest of America who happens to be the ex-girlfriend of the main supervillain when they're in college, and so they get back together and they create a false identity for her, and she goes into the Washington cocktail circuit to link up again with her ex-boyfriend. And in one episode in the first series as well, the kind of bystander who gets involved with it is a 13-year-old Kurt Russell, which is kind of weird and cool. And he doesn't show anywhere near the acting chops he later showed, but it's good to see actors at the beginning of their career. The second and third and fourth seasons, of course, were done in colour. And the weird and wonderful thing about it is, from the second season onward, when Ilya Kuryakin became a full partner to Napoleon Solo, they started camping it up and making the series a lot more silly, because a phenomenon hit the screens that was campy and silly and colourful and weird, and that was, of course, the 1966 Batman series came on board. And every series with an action-adventure format, with some exceptions, started to emulate that, and The Man from U.n.c.l.e. did that as well. It had some really weird premises for some of the episodes, and they got some now famous and quite well-regarded writers to do the scripts for the series as well. Harlan Ellison wrote 2 scripts, for instance, and Robert Towne, who later went on to write Chinatown, wrote a script for it. And like with the Batman series, the guest actors were fantastic. George Sanders, Rip Torn, a whole bunch of actors who had distinguished careers before the series came in and did individual episodes playing a villain or a scientist or something along those lines. So it really did showcase about 50 years of acting experience, as well as the wonderfulness of 1960s episodic television. Because I've been kind of grooving on 1960s TV a lot lately, and because I'm in the very 1960s headspace because of Tarantino's new movie, I started looking at the stunt work in each of the episodes that I watched. And there's some really top stunt work. There are a lot of ladder falls and people falling off platforms. The fight scenes are quite gritty and well done, and they really do put across the fights well. There are some great car chases and car crashes. It's just kind of layered with that stuff, and then goes to show you that the world that Tarantino created for Once Upon a Time in America, particularly regarding Cliff Booth, had a real basis in these kind of anonymous stunt guys who worked through the 1960s and gave a little bit of kind of grittiness and a little bit of realism to the innately fantastic premise of The Man from U.n.c.l.e. and series like that. So I did say that there are links between The Man from U.n.c.l.e. and the James Bond series and Sherlock Holmes, and I'm going to explain them to you now. For a start, Sam Rolfe, who created The Man from U.n.c.l.e., talked with Ian Fleming. He corresponded with Fleming, and Fleming gave him 2 things as a part of the series and sold them to Sam Rolfe for the series. And they were both the names of characters. The first name that Ian Fleming created was Napoleon Solo for the Robert Vaughn character. It only came out later that he was the origin of that name. And the other one was April Dancer, which was used in the 1967 spin-off series for The Man from U.n.c.l.e., The Girl from U.n.c.l.e., which is kind of a bit lame, to be honest with you. I've watched a couple of episodes of that, and April Dancer doesn't really get into the fights at all. Her offsider, Mark Slade, does all the fighting in the episodes. It's kind of a very weirdly 1960s and sexist little series, that one. The character is played by Stephanie Powers, and her offsider, Mark Slade, was played by Noel Harrison, the son of Rex Harrison. The Girl from U.n.c.l.e. didn't really last very long. It was kind of a weak premise. It was just a way of cashing in on the success of The Man from U.n.c.l.e. But the name of the character, April Dancer, was given to the series by Ian Fleming. The other link, which is a little more tenuous, the link to the Sherlock Holmes mythology, is from the novels. There are a whole bunch of novelizations of The Man from U.n.c.l.e. which were put out in the 1960s. In fact, there are 24 of them. And in the novels, David McDaniel created a backstory for Thrush, which again is an unfortunate name for reasons of fungal infection. McDaniel's premise was that Thrush was created after Sherlock Holmes killed Professor Moriarty at Reichenbach Falls by Moriarty's second in command, Colonel Sebastian Moran. He went on to create his own crime empire, which eventually evolved into being Thrush, which is a groovy premise, and it was one of those throwaway lines that McDaniel put into the novels because they had to be written pretty quickly, but it stuck to the mythology. So there's a link to both Sherlock Holmes and to the James Bond series in The Man from U.n.c.l.e. Now in 1983, after the series had ended, of course, they did a TV movie called The Return of the Man from U.n.c.l.e. where they brought back David McCallum and Robert Vaughn and even added George Lazenby playing a lightly veiled James Bond kind of character. It didn't really play because there wasn't much between Ilya Kuryakin and Napoleon Solo. They kind of split the two characters off and put them on missions with younger agents because they wanted to do a spin-off TV series. Never happened. But it's a pretty weak little effort, that one. However, the recent The Man from U.n.c.l.e. movie, directed by Guy Ritchie and starring Henry Cavill and Armie Hammer, is worth your time. It's really fun. It doesn't take itself seriously. It's got the absurdity of the original series, and it's an honourable addition to the intellectual property. I really want to see a sequel to that one. And one of the great things about it too is the soundtrack is great. It has a whole bunch of music made for the movie, plus it does weird and wonderful things like putting in 1960s Italian pop music into the soundtrack and into the movie itself. It's one of my favourite soundtracks of the last 10 years. It really does deliver the goods. There's a real wonderful weirdness to The Man from U.n.c.l.e. that I really appreciate. Just to go back to the series for a bit, I love the fact that they did a lot with a little. The sets were sometimes quite constrained, like they were in the original Star Trek series. There wasn't a lot of money to throw around, so they did a lot with a little. They really went kind of to the abstract in the later series with some of the sets. They used a lot of locations around California to represent all sorts of different places around the world. They didn't, unlike series like I Spy and It Takes a Thief, they didn't have the resources to go traveling around the world to get B-roll of the actors wandering around Venice or Hong Kong or wherever. They did it all in California. They did it all kind of in-house. But they do give you the idea this is a worldwide spy world, and they get actors speaking in their second language, for instance, to kind of fill that out. One of the other things that's kind of cool too is that you get William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy in an episode of The Man from U.n.c.l.e. before they were in Star Trek, which is kind of cool. I don't think either of them is particularly distinguished in the episode, but it's just one of those things where you see those actors together in something that's not related to the Star Trek franchise. 105 episodes, you're going to find something you like if you watch it. I'm not going to watch all of the 105 episodes. I've got some other things to watch, and it'll be a bit dull for you if that's the only thing I'll watch and talk about for the next 6 months. But I highly recommend watching The Man from U.n.c.l.e. if you can get hold of them. There were also adaptations of particular episodes which were spun out into feature films. There are 8 feature films made and distributed in various markets with Napoleon Solo and Ilya Kuryakin in them. The 8 movies between 1964 and 1968 were To Trap a Spy, The Spy with My Face, One Spy Too Many, One of Our Spies is Missing, The Spy in the Green Hat, I kid you not, The Karate Killers, The Helicopter Spies, and How to Steal the World. Now I've got about 5 of those on DVD and I've watched them at various times. What they tended to do was they do a double episode. So if there was a part 1 and part 2 episode, they'd use that as the basis for the movies and then throw in a subplot with some other actors and get them to do that to fill out the running time to about 88-90 minutes. So it's a little bit of a kind of Frankensteinian thing, and there are some kind of continuity problems in those movies, but I remember watching them when I was in the cinema as a kid. I'd go to double features at 12 o'clock on Saturday, and occasionally one of the movies they were showing was a Man from U.n.c.l.e. film. The Man from U.n.c.l.e. is part of that Bond mania from the 1960s. There were so many different spin-offs for it. Danger Man in the UK, It Takes a Thief, I Spy. the original Mission Impossible series, which is a lot of fun as well, and also a whole genre of films in Europe which are known collectively as Eurospy, and I really should do a video about them one day. Anyway, that's about it this time around. Again, thank you to all of the subscribers. Getting to 500 is a hell of an achievement for me, and I've really enjoyed the journey to this point, and I'm going to keep it up as well. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and leave a comment with your favorite 1960s spy stuff. I'll answer every comment I get, and I always do. And you can also support the channel via Patreon, details at the end. And after the video, I'm going to be doing a credit where everybody who's a Patreon supporter of the podcast and the video gets name checked at the end of the videos. So in the meantime, look after yourselves, watch some spy movies, watch some other movies, have a good time, and I'll be back in a week with another video. Take care of yourselves.